Okay, so what I want to talk about today is hypergamy. And in particular, what I'm going to do is kind of address one of the arguments I see in the manosphere, we'll say, against hypergamy. And uh, ultimately, I'm not actually supporting hypergamy per se, but what am going to do is kind of show you why it's happening and hopefully how you can kind of contribute to dissolution of it a little bit. So first, let's kind of steelman the manosphere argument. So manosphere says that hypergamy is bad because all of the women are going to go for the top 10% of men, and that's going to leave 90% of men lonely, and that loneliness creates a loneliness epidemic, and that creates a kind of a scarcity of companionship, and that leads to civil unrest, right? Because the men, they want perhaps sex, they want children, they have these needs, and if they're not being met, then it's going to lead to civil unrest. And beyond that, it's not just the men who are going to be lonely, because if 90% of women, or if all the women are going for 10% of the men, then you're going to have you're going to have a lot of lonely women too, because the top 10% of men can't court all of the women. They're going to have to pick one, right? Or maybe even a couple, but they can't pick all of them, right? So the women will also be lonely in response to this hypergamy. So what I'm going to say is that ultimately the hypergamy will actually not be sustainable either. And to kind of show you why this argument against hypergamy is not really valid per se, it ultimately comes down to this, okay? Women have a unique responsibility, okay? And that responsibility is to choose environments that are fit for children, okay? This is a very it's a very important responsibility, and if you know anything about nature, you would understand that nature doesn't like compromising. Women are instinctually driven to choose good environments for children, because otherwise the children are not going to survive. And nature, life in general, is naturally driven to survive, right? That is the one fundamental drive we have. No matter who you are, so long as you have a will to live, a drive to survive, you're gonna live, okay? So what I want to kind of show you, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of break down this environment that women have to essentially find in order to raise children safely, okay? So there's kind of like, we'll say 3 parts to that environment. The first part is men, right? The women have to find a good father, okay? They have to find a father who can provide resources. But beyond that, women also have to provide, they have to find an economy that can also provide resources, because the man can't provide them all himself. The man has to kind of participate in the economy in order to bring the resources in. And lastly, the environment has to have a healthy ecosystem, right? So you don't want to raise a child in a polluted city, right? You don't want the child breathing in a bunch of smog or something, so or toxic chemicals. So let's say that you are a man who has all of your ducks in a line, right? You got your 401k, you got your house, right? Let's say you paid off your house, you got your, let's say you have a really good job, maybe you're even like you're even the CEO or something, or you're the owner, and yet women aren't choosing you. Women are choosing not to enter a relationship with you. Let's say you're even handsome, right? You're handsome, you're 6'3", you're muscular, you got everything, you have the whole package, and yet women aren't choosing you. Why might that be? Well, because the manner in which you acquire your ducks and line up your ducks fucking matters. So if you line up all your ducks at the expense of someone else's ducks down the road, then what you have done is you have created economic instability, right? If the man down the road can't acquire his necessities because you exploited him in the workplace or in the stock market, then what you're going to end up doing is creating civil unrest that creates a scarcity of safety for you. And just like that, women don't have any safe bets. No matter how much money you have, you can't guarantee safety for that woman and her potential child. And women can sense this. Women, whether they know it or not, they can subconsciously or consciously sense instability in an economy. And it's not really that hard to sense, right? Every time you turn on the news, you see some fear propagation or fear mongering about the next collapse of the economy due to the AI bubble or something, right? There's always another collapse in the economy coming. It happens every fucking 10 years nowadays. And the reason for that is because we're exploiting each other, right? So women, again, they can sense the instability in the economy. So if you line up all your ducks at the expense of some man's ducks down the road, they're not going to be inclined to reproduce, and they're not going to be inclined to choose you by extension. So even beyond that, though, let's say you lined up your ducks at the expense of the ecosystem, right? Let's say you work for some company that pollutes the environment and shoots a bunch of toxic chemicals into the air. You've undermined everything that a healthy child relies on, except a bank account, right? Maybe you got money, maybe you got the muscles, and you're 6'3", but you've undermined the stability of the economy and the health of the environment, or the health of the ecosystem in that process. So, to kind of put this in economic terms for you, let's say that you acquire a local abundance of physiological necessities, right? And that's theoretically what children need, right? But let's say that abundance of physiological necessities, that local abundance, came at the expense of someone else's physiological necessities. So in other words, you acquired a local abundance of physiological necessities and created a scarcity, a non-local scarcity of physiological necessities somewhere else, for somebody else. And what does that do? Well, now they get pissed. Now they are struggling to survive. And what that encourages those people to do is create a local scarcity of safety for you. And what this does is creates a lack of safety. It creates a scarcity of safety. And scarcity is a physiological need as much as food, water, and shelter are. So by exploiting your neighbor or somebody across the country or across the world even, you have undermined your abundance. You have undermined your abundance of physiological necessities through exploitation. This is the funny thing about greed, is that when greed comes through exploitation, when your abundance comes through exploitation, you create a scarcity of safety for yourself, because the people who are being exploited are going to do anything to acquire those necessities, including threaten your life physically, right? And to kind of talk about the ecosystem side from the same perspective, let's imagine there's a creek going through your backyard. You're not going to go into your neighbor's yard and dump a bunch of garbage in the creek upstream, because it's just gonna flow down to your fucking backyard, right? In the same light, you're not going to go up the road and burn a bunch of toxic chemicals when it's just going to blow down into the air you're breathing, right? So we understand that we all rely on the same ecosystem, and yet we don't apply that same logic to the economic structure. We don't apply that same logic to our neighbor who we may be exploiting, okay? So exploiting your neighbor is akin to dumping your garbage upstream. It doesn't make any sense. We have to understand that we're all kind of one. We're all kind of reliant on each other in this economy. In the West, we've been fooled into this belief that we are all independent, that we all don't need anybody else just because our bank account it has a big number on it, right? It has a bunch of zeros. Hopefully there's a number before the zero. So in that belief, we forget that the value that money represents relies on everybody else having necessities. We have to kind of create a foundation of physiological necessities in order to sustain ourselves, in order to sustain women's desire to bring children into the world. Okay? So if you're lonely as a man, I promise you the answer is not to blame women, and the answer is not to point fingers at hypergamy or whatever. The answer is not to the answer isn't to get mad at the people who are not giving you what they want. The answer is to create what people need, okay? And if you're creating what people need, or sorry, if you're acquiring what you need at the expense of what other people need, then you're undermining the very thing that you need to get what you want. You can't undermine your neighbor, just as you can't go burn toxic chemicals in their yard without expecting it to come back and bite you in the ass. So thanks for watching.